To the members of the public that are joining us for this evening's City Council meeting, if you wish to speak this evening, you can utilize the chat feature to send me a message, and I will add you to our public speaker list. Thank you. Just a reminder for those individuals that are joining us for this evening's City Council meeting, if you wish to speak on an agenda item, please utilize the chat feature. Send me a message, and I will add you to our public speaker list. Thank you.
Welcome. Good evening, everybody. We will call this meeting to order for our regular session of July 26th, 2021. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Sanchez Palacios. Here. Councilmember Brown. Here. Councilmember Johnson.
Here.
Councilmember Halter.
Here.
Councilmember Friedman.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Schrader.
Here.
Mayor Rubalcaba.
Here. All right, and so now the Deputy Mayor Schrader will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
If we'll stand.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you. So for this evening, for this council meeting, we are welcoming the public both virtually and in person. When attending at City Hall, all visitors must wear a mask at all times, including when speaking. Tonight, we have a time-specific agenda item, our public hearing on district boundaries. For that agenda item, we cannot start it before 6:15, and if we are on another agenda item at 6:15, we are allowed to finish it and then must hear 12A. This could result in a change to our agenda order this evening. The next item is closed session report. City Attorney Diaz.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, there was no closed session this evening, and there is nothing to report.
Thank you. And now we have city council communications. Any council communications? All right, it seems like we have none. Next, we have city manager communications.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the council. Just two quick things to bring to the council's attention. Right now, we are heading into the most important part, well, one of the most important parts of our general plan process, the housing element. And there will be a lot of, the housing element's coming up on August 2nd, I apologize. The first item is to announce that through the course of this coming summer, there will be several opportunities for the public to weigh in on a number of very important surveys. And the opportunities are to hear from the public about the Climate Action and Resilience Plan, the Visionary Survey, as well as the Active Transportation Plan. All of these three are very important opportunities for the public to provide feedback so that the general plan process can continue to move forward. All the surveys will be in both English as well as in Spanish. And it's really important if the community is interested in helping shape our future, this is a great opportunity to do so from the comfort of your own home. So please, 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 we encourage people to participate. And on the slide there, you can see the visit plan, planventura.com is the website for which people should visit. The second item, important in our process on the general plan, is on August 2nd, the council will be hearing the draft housing element. This is a very important document, a very important chapter of the general plan. This will be a joint council meeting with the Planning Commission, and the hope is we will be able to get through the plan on the 2nd and then send the draft plan to the state of California for its review, and then the council will have more opportunities to weigh in on the plan later on as well. On August 2nd, that will be our final meeting, and the council will take a well-deserved 5-week break from each other and from the work of council to maybe focus on other exciting things in your lives. We will resume on September 13th, and there will be plenty of business waiting for the council when you return. So thank you, Madam Mayor, Council.
Thank you, City Manager McIntyre. Our next item is our consent items. We have 8 consent items on the agenda tonight. 9A, move all resolutions and ordinances presented tonight be deemed read by title only and all further reading be waived. 9B, consider contract extension with Muni Services, LLC. 9C, consider for approval proposed Ventura Water Environmental Protection Agency infrastructure loan and application fee payment. 9D, consideration of purchase of fire ladder truck. 9E, professional service agreement with HDR Inc. for Ventura Water Pure brine line and ocean outfall. 9F, consideration of professional services agreement with Waterways Consulting Inc. for fish passage improvements, design services for Project 97945, Ventura River Fish Passage improvements at Foster Park. 9G, consideration of a resolution of intention to abandon a portion of Church Street west of North Ann Street. 9H, Avoqua Water Technologies granular activated carbon system lease. Would any of my colleagues like to pull an item, have questions on an item, or comments? Councilmember Friedman?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a couple questions on 9E.
All right, thank you. Any others? If you have any questions, you can go ahead and press your button, click to speak. on your screen.
And I have one question, I believe, for 9E as well.
9E? All right. Any others? If there are no others, then we will go ahead and take the questions for 9E. Councilmember Friedman?
Okay, and so we have to be done by 9:15, or 6:15, right?
If we're not done, we can pause and we can continue. Yeah.
So this is one of those big consent items that, because oftentimes we'll deal with a $25,000 item, we'll spend an hour at the full public hearing. This is $3.5 million that's coming in as a consent item, and I actually had a couple questions, and I wonder if Linda Szymanski, oh, she's here, good. I know this is a capital project, but at the same time, this is all the work that's leading up to the actual capital part of the project, meaning the materials and the building of the outfall. This would be the design and consulting and permits? Is that how that's going to work?
Good evening, Madam Mayor and Councilmember Friedman. Yes, we consider the planning and the design and permitting as part of the capital project. So this work is for the design, which will then give us what we need to bid and build this project.
And so at this point, we don't know what the actual project will cost?
That's correct. We have an estimate at this time, but this work will help us to hone in on that price.
Okay. And this is the outfall that is being built as a result of the Water Pure project, which is going to begin at Marina Park, take a quick right, and then head out X amount of feet into the ocean. And I can't remember how far out that was. How far out was that?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Friedman, the outfall is approximately 6,000 feet into
Okay.
the ocean from Marina Park. A portion of it will be buried, and a portion of it will lay on the ocean floor.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you, Linda. Appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Friedman, and thank you. Deputy Mayor Schrader?
The 445,000 kind of a contingency fund, is it accurate to say that that number is that significant because you're going to have to get those plans approved by the Coastal Commission and 3 or 4 other regulatory agencies?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Schrader, yes, that's correct. We asked for 15% contingency, which is slightly higher than your typical 10%, but we realized that there is more risk involved in what we're going to need to have done with this project because we do need to take it to a handful of permitting agencies who have the option to have us provide them with more work. So we've asked for a larger contingency in case we need it.
All right, thank you very much. And thank you, Deputy Mayor Schrader. Madam Clerk, do we have any public comments for any of our consent items?
We have no public comments or no public speakers on the consent items.
All right, thank you. So we will go ahead and entertain a motion for all of our consent items.
So moved.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Madam Clerk, please proceed with the vote.
Madam Clerk, I'd like to record for the sake of the fact that I'm inside a setback distance from item 9G. I'd like to have it recorded that I'm abstaining from that vote, but I will be voting on the rest.
Now is the time when we're going to do an oral vote for the consent item 9A through 9H, with Councilmember Halter will be abstaining on 9G. Councilmember Sanchez Palacios?
Yes.
Councilmember Brown?
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Councilmember Halter?
Yes.
Councilmember Friedman?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Schrader?
Yes.
Mayor Rubalcaba?
Yes.
That motion carries 7-0.
All right, thank you. So now it is time for our time-specific agenda item, our public hearing. So we have 12A, public hearing to receive input from the community regarding the redrawing of election district boundaries. Madam Clerk, have all of the noticing requirements been met?
Yes, all the noticing requirements have been met, and they're on file in the city clerk's office.
All right, wonderful. We may begin with the presentation.
And just one moment, Assistant City Clerk ran out to go grab us a revised copies of the script, and then we'll share the PowerPoint.
All right, thank you.
While we're waiting for that, I would like it to be noted that here at City Hall, as stated in our public hearing notice, if anybody needed transcription or interpretation for this meeting, it is available at City Hall, and it will be available for all future public hearings related to this topic. So Mayor and Council members, this evening, we are going to give you a presentation on redrawing our district election boundaries utilizing the Census 2020 data. Joining me this evening will be Kristen Parks from National Demographics Corporation. NDC is the same demographer that we utilized when we moved to the district election process in 2017. So they worked very closely with us, and we're very excited that they will be joining us on this next venture. Next slide. So Kristen, they are ready for you.
Good evening. Thank you so much for having me tonight. And again, as you heard, my name is Kristen Parks, and I am a consultant with the National Demographics Corporation. Next slide. So as you all know, the city of Ventura did make a recent transition to district elections. And I want to note that the city was proactive in this process by having voters approve a charter amendment in 2016 that allowed the city council to determine how members would be elected. And of course, this was in advance of many jurisdictions in California receiving letters pursuant to the California Voting Rights Act. And so when Ventura transitioned to districts, NDC was the consultant hired to assist with the process, and the new district map was drawn, or the brand new first-time district map was drawn in 2017 and implemented in 2018. And of course, now that it's 2021, it may seem very soon to all of you, but we're doing this again. We need to revisit those lines after the 2020 census. Next slide. So this is your current district map with your 7 council districts. And even though these districts were drawn in 2017, it's important to be aware that they were drawn using data from the prior census, which was in 2010. So now that we have, or are going to very soon have 2020 census data, we will be drawing lines, or the public will be drawing lines to reflect that new population data. Next slide. So along with the new census data, we also have a new law in the state of California that adds some changes into the process. And these are some of the procedural requirements I just want to highlight for the council and the public, because it is different than the process that you went through in 2017. So under the California Fair Maps Act, the city must conduct at least 4 public hearings prior to adopting a new district map. They must provide live interpretation during redistricting public hearings if requested 72 hours in advance. And as I'm noting here on the slide, Spanish is the only language required for the city of Ventura. The city is also required to conduct extensive outreach to media and community groups. And the law does emphasize reaching out to those in underrepresented and non-English speaking communities. And finally, and as you will see at the end of this presentation, the city must establish a redistricting website and maintain it for 10 years at least. The reason for that is that, of course, it will be 10 years until the next census and the next redistricting process. Next slide. So here is the timeline that we have worked together to create. Not everything is set in stone yet. However, congratulations, you have started the process. And this timeline is a little bit compressed because the COVID-19 pandemic did cause some delays in the Census Bureau. And so data that we expected to have months ago, we are actually still waiting on. And so I just wanted to give everyone a sense of how quickly this timeline will move once we get that data, and also what the major steps are along the way. So as I mentioned, there are 4 public hearings. So we have proposed dates for the second one, and then a window for, proposed for the second and the third, and a window for the fourth. But we're expecting our United States total population counts from the Census Bureau in mid-August, so by August 16th. And then we do need to wait a few more weeks for the state of California to take all of the state prisoner residence information and reallocate them back to their home jurisdictions. So once we get that official California data, then, really by the beginning of October, we can launch public mapping tools that will empower the community and the residents of Pasadena to actually start drawing their own district maps to be considered as part of this process. So we will get busy before the holiday season. We'll take probably a little break for the holidays, and then coming back in January, we'll have the opportunity to start looking at draft maps, analyze them. As your demographer, I will provide a demographic report for every map, and then we can narrow down to some of our focus maps. And ultimately, the key thing on this timeline is your April 17th, 2022 deadline. So that is the statutory deadline for your city council to adopt their new map. And of course, that is driven by the fact that the first election with the new map will be on November 8th, 2022, and we need to give time for the county registrar to implement the new lines of districts. Next slide. So once we embark on this process and actually start looking at maps, there are important legal criteria that we must follow. So there are 2 categories of legal requirements that are absolutely mandatory for us in the city of Ventura, and that's the federal laws and the California state laws. The federal laws say first that each district must be equal in population size. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. The second thing that we need to look to federal law for is to ensure compliance with the Voting Rights Act. What that means is that when we're drawing district lines, we do not want to dilute the vote of protected classes. So we do not want to dilute the ability of protected classes of people to elect a representative. We also must avoid racial gerrymandering, which means that while we are considering race as one of the important factors when talking about communities and identity, that we should never be drawing district lines using only race or using race as the predominant factor. So those are the federal laws. I mentioned the California Fair Maps Act, and I mentioned its procedural requirements. It also gives us brand new rank order criteria for all cities to consider when drawing district maps. So California has 4 criteria, and they are listed here in order that of importance, or in order that they must be considered. First being that each district, to the extent possible, should be geographically contiguous. Now, Ventura and some other cities, the city boundaries themselves may not be entirely contiguous, meaning that there may be little pieces that are sort of islands that are not connected to the rest. California state law says when we draw our districts, we need to do the best that we possibly can to ensure that each district is one piece and it's not broken up. The second criterion under California state law is to minimize the division of neighborhoods and communities of interest. So trying to ensure that neighborhoods and communities of interest are not divided or broken up into multiple council districts if these neighborhoods and communities wish to stay in one council district. So again, I'll talk more about that and describe exactly what that will look like. Third criterion is to create easily identifiable boundaries. So if you live in a district, you should be able to very easily explain to your neighbor where your district ends and where the next one begins, right? So oftentimes this is accomplished when our district lines follow natural boundaries like roads or waterways. The final criterion under California state law is that districts should be compact. Now, there are different academic, mathematical ways to measure compactness, but ultimately people can think about the shape of the district, that we want to try to avoid strangely shaped districts that would bypass a nearby pocket of population to pull in a farther away pocket of population. The thing to keep in mind with all of these criteria is that they are important, but there may be things, because they are in rank order, some of them are more important than others. And so whenever we are confronted with, the choice between maintaining compactness, for example, and complying with the Federal Voting Rights Act, we need to comply first with the Federal Voting Rights Act. So if you see districts that are not compact, it may well be because we were complying with another legal requirement. I know this is complicated, and we will be reviewing it in the future, but it's very important, I think, also for members of the public to understand what are the parameters for this discussion and process. Of course, there are other goals that you can consider, and they're listed here on this slide so that we know that, yes, we can talk about other things. We can talk about preserving the core of our existing districts. We can talk about trying to minimize voters being shifted from having the ability to vote for their council member in 2022. We may want to try to avoid people who would have had that chance in 2022 pushing them to 2024 or something like that. However, again, all of these other goals that we may have or have been traditionally associated with redistricting have to come after consideration of federal and state law. Next slide. Okay, so as I just showed you, having balanced population from district to district is required by federal law. And federal law doesn't say that each of your 7 districts has to have exactly the same number of people. But through court cases, there has been established a expectation that the total deviation of the total population deviation will be under 10%. So what I'm showing you on this slide are NDC's estimates of 2020 population for each of the 7 council districts in Ventura. And you'll see that there actually is quite a lot of deviation right now. What that tells you, and the reason why I show this to my clients, is to show them that even if you drew these districts pretty recently, on a very basic level, if their population is not balanced, we have to go back and correct that, right? So some cities will say we don't have to change the lines, but when you look at a 17-18% potential deviation between your smallest size district and your largest size district, we're really looking to bring everyone closer to that ideal district size. Based on these estimates, right, you take the total population of the city, estimated at 109,673, divided by 7, you get an ideal district size so that everyone is being fairly represented. Each district has about the same number of people, about 15,668. The last thing I want to say here is that estimates, the only guarantee with an estimate is that it will change. So by mid-August, I will be able to present to you the actual total population for the 7 districts. But this is just to give you an idea and get us started. Next slide. So the second criterion required by the state of California when drawing district lines through redistricting is to minimize division of neighborhoods and communities of interest. Most of us know what a neighborhood is, and oftentimes our cities actually define some boundaries of neighborhoods for us and have neighborhood councils like Ventura. But communities of interest is a term that many people are not familiar with. And so under the state law, the Fair Maps Act, a community of interest is defined as a population that shares common social or economic interests and wants to be included in one single council district so that it can elect a representative. The thing to keep in mind for members of the public is that the council really is going to rely on you to define those communities of interest and locate them and identify the boundaries of those communities. Communities of interest are smaller than the district size. So we can think of neighborhoods and communities as being building blocks for each council district. The process of redistricting is simply deciding, well, nothing's simple here, but deciding which neighborhoods and communities will be grouped together within each council district with the goal of minimizing divisions. Next slide. So there are many different ways that you can define a community, right, that has common social or economic interests. You can think of things like neighborhood councils, general plan areas, historic districts. You can even think about areas around parks or schools. You can think of, parts of the city where people have a shared culture, a shared language or history. There are many ways to think about this. Next slide. So once we have thought through communities of interest, and once we have that final population data from the Census Bureau ready to go, we are preparing for the city public mapping tools to empower residents of Ventura to participate in this process and propose their own district maps. So what you see here on this slide is a snapshot of one of the paper maps used in 2017, and we will be providing that tool as the easiest to use way for the public to submit their ideas by actually drawing on a paper map. And then we also have, and what you used also in 2017 was an online mapping tool that's very, very powerful. And it is populated with an extensive database of demographic information, so that community members can draw districts and also see on the map things like racial and ethnic data, household income, housing status, percentage of families with children, languages spoken, all sorts of data as well through that powerful database. Next slide. Okay, so, but since we don't have that data yet, we want to bring the conversation today back to something smaller than the total district, which is the community of interest. And this is the first opportunity that this council is having for the redistricting process to hear from the public what defines their community of interest. And there are two components that the public should think about when they're defining their community. You should think about what brings that community together. What are those shared interests? And the reason that those shared interests or experiences are important is because redistricting is about representation, right? That's what matters here. So you want to think about how your community is similarly impacted by policies adopted by the city council, right? So we're thinking about how your community will be impacted by city policies. The second piece of this is, where is your community? Where are the boundaries of your community? Is it the boundaries of your neighborhood council, or is there another way for you to identify it? And we just like to remind people, don't only think of roads and streets as boundaries. You can also think of other things like hills or areas around schools or landmarks, right? Think about, for Ventura, different topography. So be creative if you need to, but ultimately what we're looking for is to hear about communities that want to be represented within a single district, meaning they are a community that has these shared interests and experiences, and they want one council member to represent them rather than being split into multiple districts. Next slide. So these are just a few questions to get that conversation about communities of interest started. What are the geographic boundaries of your neighborhood or community of interest? Should your neighborhood or community of interest be kept together in one district? And what are some other communities of interest that the city should consider when drawing district maps? And of course, once we do launch the public mapping tools and the public submits maps, those maps enter into the public record and become a consideration in this process as we get closer and closer to that April deadline. So next slide. And I'm going to pass this over to the city clerk to introduce you to the new website.
So on the city's website, we've started working on our redistricting web pages. We have a nice short URL that we'll be able to use, cityoventura.ca.gov/redistricting. And from there, the public will be able to gain access to all the information related to our redistricting. We started off with some basic information. Next slide. We're putting in our notices for our public hearings. We're putting in hyperlinks to the agendas, the staff reports, any materials that will be able to assist the public. And I hope to venture out to some of our community councils and speak to the members there to encourage more public participation. And as those are scheduled, I will list those also on our redistricting schedule. Next slide. And we're still working on our draft maps and our drawing maps pages. Once those tools are available, those pages will become live. But we do have frequently asked questions data there, including some hyperlinks to the various assembly bills and election codes that are dictating our redistricting process. Next slide. So at this point, We can answer questions from council, and we can also hear from any members of the public that wish to present us any ideas maybe on our communities of interest.
Do we have email communications from members of the public or public speakers?
We have no email communications, but we do have a public speaker.
Okay, let's go ahead and listen to the public speaker
Okay.
first.
Our speaker this evening will be Liz Campos. Liz, I'm going to make you a panelist. Okay, Liz, you are unmuted.
Thank you. I read through the presentation materials and listening tonight. It sounds like everything's in order. I have a concern that with the increasing Delta spread, Delta variety of the coronavirus spread, that there may be further shutdown, or we may continue for a while with hybrid meetings. And if the only translation for our community members on the west side, which is way too many people come into council chambers, if the only translation must be in council chambers, I'm concerned that a lot of people will be left behind. So I would ask that the council consider that a professional interpreter also be on hand to maybe meet where people can. As Manos Unidos has come to council before from Bell Arts, there are locations, but we do need to include all the community. Thank you for hearing me tonight.
Thank you, Ms. Campos.
And that concludes our public speakers this evening.
All right, thank you. So now we will take questions from council members. If you would like to ask a question, go ahead and press on the button on the screen. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Ms. Parks, for the great presentation. I look forward to engaging in this process. I was curious, let's start with a couple of things. If we could go to slide, slide 10, please. Thank you. You know, as we look at where it shows the neighborhood councils, I can't help but note that it's not really reflecting the way our community councils are organized. We do have a big chunk in what this is listed as Midtown, which does not actually have a community council. So it's important that we reach out to the people in that neighborhood. And then also on the east end, actually, a large chunk of that would be the Montalvo Community Council. And so it's just important that we start from there. And again, I can't stress enough how important it is that we don't rely solely on the community councils to reach out to people. Because when you look at, and when you look at downtown Ventura, really that's, the Downtown Ventura Partners is not really a neighborhood council. When you add together all the people that aren't represented by a community council, you get about 15,000 Ventura residents, which is about a district's worth of people. And so I just bring this to your attention, Ms. Parks. I hope in future we'll use more accurate maps. But I do have a question about the estimates on slide, I guess it would be slide 8. Thank you. So the 2,800, am I correct in assuming that that's what we're estimating will be our increase since 2010?
So that's the total deviation. So just adding up all of the deviations, will that be your total increase from 2010? I would have to pull up the 2010 population.
It was right
look
about
at that.
106.
Yeah,
So
then
it's close.
then that sounds correct. Yeah.
Thank you.
Again, this will change.
No, I appreciate that. What I'm curious about, is that number based on the 2019 American Community Survey number, or is that based on what's happened with housing in the city?
No, so it's not based, well, the American Community Survey will capture some of that, but it's important to remember that the American Community Survey, which is what we're using, but it's not just 2019, it's actually a 5-year rolling, right? So they lump in the average for 5 years of American Community Surveys into one estimate, right?
Right.
And so that will not take into account every new housing development because it is a random sample.
Thank you. And so, and as we look at these numbers, they're fascinating, of course. And so, if I understand this correctly, this would be saying that the boundaries of districts 1 and 6, if these were the numbers, the districts 1 and 6 would actually see their boundaries expand, and 3 and 7 would contract, correct? Because that's a little counterintuitive.
Right. It is. When you look at the negative numbers, you think shrinking, but no, the ones with the negative numbers, if these estimates are correct, would need to expand their boundaries to include additional population to get closer to that ideal.
Thank you. And then, do you know, as we look at, as we go back and look at the maps, and I know I submitted a couple maps myself the last time we did this, did the census blocks, did the actual shape of the blocks change a lot since the 2010 census?
Unfortunately, there are quite a lot of changes.
Okay. So we're really just going to have to wait and until
we're gonna
have granular data. Thank you. And then
that's the part that we, we'll figure out for you and do that nitty-gritty work of mapping the current council boundaries the best we can onto the new census blocks.
Okay, thank you. And then when we talked about the communities of interest, we have a community, Montalvo, which really was pretty recently annexed. Would that qualify as a potential community of interest?
Absolutely. I think what's important to stress about communities of interest is they are subjectively defined, right? So if you have members of the community saying we're a community of interest and here's our boundaries, some communities of interest may end up having more influence than others based on, how many people you hear from. But yes, so if Montalvo comes to you and says we're a community of interest, the question you want to ask them is, okay, well, where do you see your boundaries as?
Okay, thank you so much. Those are all my questions. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Johnson. And now we have Councilmember Sanchez Palacios.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Good evening, and thank you again, Ms. Parks and our City Clerk's office for preparing this report tonight. My questions are similar to the topics that have already been touched upon, primarily getting the word out to the public and ensuring that there is adequate translation. I was curious if it's been considered, if we're still in the same situation that we are now with COVID and being virtual as well as in person, how could we ensure, adequate translation? I know that for our first meeting, though, on our end, a lot of things worked out really well. I did hear also from others that there was either delay or not a direct and straight audio. It would cut off, and so I want to make sure that folks will get the adequate translation that they need, and so just wanted to ask about that, if it's been thought about or considered, or any ideas floating out there yet.
So I can speak to what some of my other clients are doing, other cities, and most of the other cities are, if they're having hybrid meetings, they are providing translation on site with the headphones as well as online. Now, those jurisdictions using Zoom, it's very easy because Zoom has built into it a way for translation. So using WebEx, you may want to look into can that person sitting in your chambers doing the live interpretation also be recorded as a participant and sort of a separate audio channel for folks on WebEx? I'll also say the translation requirements for the website are only that certain information, like the overview of redistricting, is translated, as well as the instructions for how to participate. However, if you so choose, I have other clients who are going above and beyond and translating some of the additional materials like staff reports or other things that may be relevant.
Okay, great. And then,
And Councilmember Sanchez Palacios, related to that,
yes,
we are in the process, I'm working with IT, and we're doing an upgrade on our WebEx.
Okay.
And this next version does allow for translations, so the end user would be able to turn on the translation in multiple languages, and they get a transcript as we speak.
oh, that's great. Thank you. Thank you for that. Similar to that topic or related to that, in regards to our website, I think it translates to different languages if we choose to, and so I wanted to make sure that that's still an option.
Yes, you're correct. Councilmember Sanchez Palacios, our website does allow for text to be converted. If I put a PDF on, I do need to put it also in Spanish because it won't translate that,
Got it.
but the
Okay.
text it will.
Thank you. And then just to make sure I had it right, so the new numbers, the new estimates would be coming back mid-August, and that's when we'll know what the numbers will really be looking like? Just want to make sure I have that right.
So I can give you the total population numbers, in probably late August. And there will only probably, for a city of the size of Ventura, there would probably only be very small changes once California processes it. However, we actually can't draw maps until we get the California redistricting data. We're actually legally told, consultants and staff can't draw anything yet. So we have to wait for the prisoner adjusted, but we can certainly report to you on the total population numbers.
Okay, great.
In August.
Thank you again for the information. That's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Sanchez Palacios. Councilmember Brown?
Thank you. I just had one question, which was, I didn't notice any contact information. Is it possible if we come up with some questions maybe later on that we can contact you offline?
Absolutely.
So would you like me just to get that from the city manager or the city clerk?
I can give you my,
I was going to say, I can provide that to all the council.
Okay, perfect. That's fine. That's all.
Thank you, Councilmember Brown. Deputy Mayor Schrader?
How did the census account for the homeless? And then how do the homeless, how do they vote in a district? Is that have we dealt with that before? Is it where, and in the census, does the census make an attempt to count the homeless population?
yes. So what the census does is it actually works very closely with institutions. And so this actually includes, colleges or universities with on-campus students. So homeless shelters or any other residences, those are usually where homeless folks are counted. Sometimes cities do their own homeless counts. I know that many counties in California in 2020 did not do their official homeless counts. So in that case, there is some imputation or estimates being used in addition to the institutional or sort of, group data from places where people are in congregate shelters, right? So yeah, there's and 2020 was a difficult year, and particularly for the colleges and universities. A lot of those, the students left. And so the census is actually having to look back to 2010 to see how many people should be there. But yeah, it is definitely difficult. It definitely was difficult in 2020 to get accurate numbers on the homeless population. So the census does their best. When it comes to homeless people registering to vote, that is absolutely possible, and that is a question that your county registrar may be able to provide more information on, how their primary location is documented within the district, or even if you have much variation of homeless population from district to district.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Schrader. Any other questions from council members? I have a couple of questions. Let's see. Have we heard of any issues or concerns with our current district boundaries? Has anybody received any emails or communications with our current district boundaries?
Mayor Rubalcaba, I have not received any.
Okay. Yeah, I was just wondering if we have information about that already. Another question that I have is for Ms. Parks. I'm wondering if you have worked with cities who allow non-citizen residents to vote. I recently was asked a couple of questions about that, and I'm not really familiar with that system, so I was wondering if you have information.
So that's a great question. I don't believe I currently have, and NDC has, by the way, we have over 150 jurisdictions in the state of California and Arizona right now as our clients. But I actually am not sure if any of them allow non-citizen voting. I do know that, for instance, the city and county of San Francisco does have non-citizen voting in their school district elections. However, I would remind you all that redistricting is it's not driven by the number of voters. It's driven by the number of residents, which includes everyone, whether they are eligible to vote or not. And that is what is the census counts. There was certainly confusion, perhaps, about that during the 2020 census, but the census counts everyone, regardless of their immigration status, and those are the population numbers that we must use.
Thank you. And one more question. We have recently received questions about perhaps having an elected mayor, and I was wondering if you have worked with cities that maybe have gone through the process after they have districts?
Yes, there's every variety of when a city may choose to make that change. Being a charter city, that would need to, I imagine, be a charter amendment. And my advice would be, if you're thinking about having an at-large elected mayor, right, you have to figure out, well, are you going to keep 7 as the number of council members, or would you go to 6 plus an at-large mayor? So we've seen a kind of, I would say, every, combination that there could be. And if that is something that maybe there may be interest in Ventura for, certainly have the staff communicate with me, and we can let you know what our recommendations are in terms of timing. Whether you want to try to do something now, or in terms of thinking to November election, if you're going to do any sort of charter amendment, or even later, or what. So definitely talk with us, and we can give you our best advice on how that may affect redistricting or your considerations for timing.
All right, thank you, Ms. Parks. One more question for our city clerk. You mentioned that we're going to upgrade our WebEx to have transcript translation. How does that work?
Mayor Rubalcaba, so how that would work is on the end users, they would have the ability to choose they want to see a transcript. So when you think about when you're looking at a WebEx, you can see the list on the right of all your participants. They would be able to pick they want a transcript, and on the right, it would have the name of who's speaking and what they're saying. And so it would transcribe me, and then if you speak, it would transcribe you.
Okay, yeah, I've never seen that, so I was just wondering how it worked. I'm wondering if maybe we can test it before it goes live, just to kind of see how it works. And if you would like someone to help you test it, I would be happy to do so.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks. All right, so now we have City Attorney Diaz.
Yes, Madam Mayor, I wanted to follow up on the question of the directly elected mayor. One of the legal issues that we'd have to look at is not only reducing the number of council seats, but potentially adding council seats. And the reason that we would do that is we'd have to make sure that if we took one of the 7 seats and made that a directly elected mayor, you need to make sure that we are not impacting, diluting the voting power of minority voters. And so it might be, instead of having 6 council members and a directly elected mayor, you might need to add a council seat or 2 and a directly elected mayor in order to be clear of a challenge that we're diluting the impact of minority voters. So there's a bunch of different ways to do that, and I wanted to indicate it. It wouldn't necessarily be one of you. It might be more of more council districts than less.
Thank you, City Attorney Diaz. Now we have Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Diaz actually just addressed my question. I'd be curious to know if any cities have been challenged on moving to something like that, especially after going to district elections as a way for, you know, to reduce the voting power, to dilute the power of the minority communities. And as for the WebEx, I hope it works, but I will say, Mayor, I certainly hope that we don't have robots taking over the translation for our public meetings. I think I like having human translation myself. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Johnson. Any other questions from council members? All right, I think we have no more questions. Well, thank you very much, Ms. Parks. Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. And we will now close the public hearing. All right, so now we will turn the conversation over to council for deliberation or any input or any additional comments, if there are any. All right, it seems like there are no more comments. So we will go ahead and finish up with this item. Do you need a motion, Madam Clerk, or?
We do not need a motion.
Okay. All right, wonderful. So we will now continue with our next item, which is public communications. Do we have any public speakers?
We do not have any public speakers this evening. We received one email that was posted online.
All right, thank you for that. And so our next item is item 16, City Council communications or reports for regional boards, commissions, or committees. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor. I have the pleasure of serving on the board of the Ventura County Transportation Commission, and Darren Kettle is moving on somewhere else, and so VCTC will be looking for new leadership. It's a very important position. I have come to believe that, you know, regardless of whatever land use decisions we make, I think the way a city operates really has more to do with what our transportation systems look like. So I will not be able to attend the next meeting of the VCTC, Mayor. I have reached out to you as the alternate in hopes that we can have somebody there. But it's an interesting time at the VCTC. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Johnson. All right, so just a reminder for our members of the public, our next meeting, our next regular meeting will be on Monday, August the 2nd at 6 o'clock. And just to remember, when attending a city council meeting at City Hall, all visitors must wear a mask at all times, including when speaking. Additionally, we can only accommodate a limited number of attendees at City Hall in the chambers and in our overflow room. So just as a reminder, because our next meeting is the first meeting of the month where we have public comment at the beginning. And so with that, we will go ahead and adjourn tonight's meeting. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Have a good evening.